First of all, everybody, welcome to this presentation about an alternative to native apps. And also thank you for being here to listen to this mobile dude. Hopefully I can tell you a little bit more, some new techniques or strategies. So yeah, let's start with it today. Let's first take a look at the agenda. The things that I wanted to discuss today are, first of all, about me. Hopefully you don't know me, hopefully you might. I'm going to start also with an introduction. Then I'm going to look at the alternative that you saw also in the title of this presentation. Then based on that, I'm also going to explain you what strategy you could use to automate PWAs, progressive web applications. And I will also give you some automation examples. So hopefully you will get your backpack filled with new things that you could use when you're back at your work. So let's start about myself. My name is Wim Selles, and I'm a senior solutions architect at Sauce Labs. And hi, how are you doing? Hi, Sauce Labs. Yeah, I'm doing fine. You sound a little bit like Joey. What happened? Okay, I'm doing fine, thank you. Oh yeah, sorry to disappoint you. I currently don't have any friends giffies in this presentation. I normally do that, but today I just wanted to focus on mobile stuff. So sorry that I need to disappoint you, Saucebot. But let's get back to, let's get back to myself. I'm a senior solutions architect at Sauce Labs. And basically what I do is I help customers get the most value out of the product that they bought at Sauce Labs. And this could be discussing automation strategies, looking into code automation framework assessments, solving puzzles, automation puzzles, the things that I really like to do, solving automation puzzles. I also helped a friend by writing a chapter in 2 of his books. The first chapter I wrote was about using open source software within a large organization. And the second chapter in the second book I wrote a chapter about how to automate React Native applications together with Appium, and also some best practices for that. So if you want to read them, you can find them on Amazon, you can buy them, and hopefully you will also see some other good chapters in those books. Like I also mentioned, people call me the mobile dude. I really love mobile, I really love open source and also JavaScript. So you might also find me, for example, in a lot of open source communities trying to help people solve their challenges. I also try to help them with some packages, some JavaScript packages. Yeah, if you want to know more about me, what I do, you can figure that out on Twitter, or you can take a look at my GitHub repository, and there you can find all the projects that I'm working on. But for now, let's first go back to talking about the alternative. And when we're talking about an alternative, I first want to go back to basically native applications. And I want to kind of like try to answer the reason, what does it take to develop native applications? And based on that, I want to work to the alternative. And if we're talking about developing native applications, what does it take? Well, in my opinion, there are 3 things that we need to be aware of. The development part, the distribution part, and also fragmentation. And let me just dive into some details here. Let's first take a look at, for example, development. If you're a company and you want to start developing your application, you need to be aware that you need to have the skills within your company. People need to be able to develop iOS applications or Android applications. So you need to get in specific specialists, for example, to develop your application. You need to make sure that they have the right development environment. It's pretty easy for example, Android. You can use your Linux machine or Windows machine to develop Android applications. But if you're an iOS developer, yeah, you need to have a Mac. Then we also need to be aware of that. We need to develop our code. We need to test our code. And last but not least, I think this is really a pain point, especially when we're talking about iOS. We need to be aware of security things, and especially about certificates. And I know when you're developing an application and you start with iOS applications, then the certificates can really be a pain, a real pain. But yeah, having said that, let's take a look also at distribution, because when you're ready with your app, when you think that you can push your app to production, what are the things that you need to be aware of? Well, first of all, you need to be aware of how to release your application. and also how your users are using your application. If we would compare native applications with, for example, web applications, then developing and releasing a web application is pretty easy. You can push it to production and everybody all over the world can access that specific version that you just pushed. If you need to push, for example, a bug fix, everybody will have that bug fix. If you push a bug, everybody will have a bug, but then you can easily roll it back. That's the advantage of web applications. But when we're talking about native applications and we want to push that to production, and when it's already installed on the phones of people, we need to be aware of the fact that we can have multiple versions out there in production. And that could be a pain because people might not automatically update their phones. They might not update their apps. And this is also something where TestVary can help you with. And we'll explain a little bit more about that later. What you also need to be aware of is reviews, app reviews. But because when you're done developing your app, then Apple or Google still needs to look into your application. And this will take some time to release your application to production. And you always want to have less time. You want to basically do it as fast as possible. But if you would just look into the paperwork of Apple and Google, you will see that it's between 24 hours and 7 days. And imagine that you have an issue in your application, which is out there in production. You have a bug fix. You need to be aware that the bug fix can only be there between 24 hours and around 7 days. And also we need to be aware of rules. And I want to dive into the rules in a few minutes. But these are kind of the things that you need to be aware of when we're talking about distribution for native apps, also in comparison to web applications. And then last but not least, which is also very important, is like the fragmentation in the devices. Ashwini already mentioned it, the amount of devices we have all over the world. Well, luckily, if you're an iOS developer, you have a limited set of iOS devices, and also the advantages of an iOS user is that he automatically updates his set or his OS on his device more often and more frequently than an Android user. And that also results in having more Android versions in production. And we even have some customers that still use Android KitKat 4.4, which is from, what is it, 2000, well, a long time ago. But there are still people out there in the world using that. So this makes it a little bit harder also to do some testing. And I think this is also where Sauce Labs comes into place with a very broad range of devices, screen sizes, OS versions that could help you do some testing, developing, and also debugging. But now that we know this, I mentioned that I wanted to go back to the rules. And when I think about rules, I always need to think about this specific quote. And that is, trust me, you can't play the game if you don't know the rules. And if you don't know the rules, someone's bound to get hurt. You can watch this quote or where it comes from. But if we're talking about this, if you develop your app, you want to push it to the App Store, do you know all the rules? Do you know what you're allowed to do for the app, what you can add into your app, and what Google and Apple allow you to do? And I want to give two examples today that are, I think, pretty accurate, or not accurate, but examples from the last few days. Maybe everybody has seen it. And that's this. You might have heard of Fortnite. Fortnite basically was removed from the App Store. It was removed from the Google Play Store. And the reason for that was that they thought that like the way that Apple and Google were earning money on their in-app purchases was not the way they wanted to do that. So they built their own in-app purchase system. And if you would look at that, then it might be strange that Apple and Google refused it. On the other hand, if you would look at the rules, then you also know that it was not allowed. But yeah, it's one of the rules you need to be aware of. So, oh, hi. Hi there, Sasbot. Nice to see you. Are you gaming now? Yeah, oh, it was playing Fortnite. Oh, cool. Sorry. I think it was on a PlayStation or an Xbox, not on an iPhone. But oh, fun fact, did you? Yeah, this is really cool to see. But do you also know why? Why are people using trial sessions in Sauce Labs to play Fortnite? Most of them are smart. Their kids. Ah, awesome. Ah, yeah, I can imagine. And imagine during this pandemic that you have a kid at home that needs to work on his laptop, on his Chromebook, for example. He needs to work for school. And on a Chromebook, you cannot play Fortnite. Well, those kids went to Sauce Labs and they used Sauce Labs to play Fortnite. Okay, thanks for letting us know this. Okay, cool. If we're now talking about fun facts, I just want to give you an example on how Fortnite tried to solve this. Tried to solve not being able to run something, for example, on an Android device. What they did is they got in contact with some influencers that played a lot of games. They were on Twitch, on Twitter. They're kind of like the people that all gamers were looking at. And they sent these boxes, a box like this. Apple users might know this box. This looks like a box of a MacBook. But this is what they sent. And they did this together with Samsung because you could still use Fortnite when you used it, downloaded it through the Samsung store. So this is a way how Fortnite tried to solve this. But I mentioned I wanted to give you two examples. Let's take a look at the second example. The second example about rules was from Microsoft Xbox Cloud Gaming, kind of like the xCloud. And I don't know if a lot of people know the xCloud. I think the real gamers here might know it, but basically with the xCloud, you can stream games. So you don't need to download them. It's just streaming them. And they tried to develop this also for iOS. And when they did their app review, then Apple said, well, you're not allowed to do this. They were like, why not? Well, Apple needs to review basically everything, every game that comes into the Play Store. But yeah, this was streaming. So it was a little bit different. On the other hand, if you would look at, for example, at Netflix, or if you would look at Spotify, they also stream content almost the same way as that Microsoft was doing this. So it was kind of odd that they were refused. But the difference between Microsoft and the Fortnite game was that they looked into technology. They looked into a different way. Because a few weeks ago, they came with this news. They came with the news that since the 20th of April, that you're able to run xCloud games on your iOS device, your tablet, or even on your computer without installing anything. And you might now wonder, how do they do that? Well, they do that through browsers. But they needed to do that through games or through native apps or not. Well, they found a way to do that. And this is what I wanted to discuss, the alternative. And I know this might be a long introduction. On the other hand, I hope I also give you some background about this. Let's take a look at the alternative. When we're talking about the alternative, I'm talking about native applications, comparing them with web apps. And you might now wonder, how can you ever compare the solution that, for example, Microsoft had in a native application now with a web application? Well, let's dive a little bit more into that. If you would look into native applications, then you would see that they're rich, they're reliable. You install them on your phone, you put them on your home screen or your taskbar or whatever you want, just to have access to them. Really easy. And also the advantage of those native applications is they have access also to some specific hardware on your phone. Examples that you might have in your application: Touch ID, Face ID, vibrations, basically using camera, all those things, GPS, all those things, they're accessible in native applications. And when we look at web apps, do we also have that? Well, also, let's take a look at the strong points for web applications. They're always up to date. I already mentioned that in the beginning. And that means that you can reach anyone, anywhere, on any device, which is pretty cool because you can use it on a computer, you can use it on a tablet, you can use it on an iPhone, on an Android phone. It doesn't matter which phone, you can just use it. And also one of the advantages of web applications is that there's only one single code base. And now you could say, but yeah, if we look at native applications, you might have Flutter, you might have React Native to build a native application based on a single code base. Yes, you're right. On the other hand, this is way easier to do than to know all the other languages. This is basically just HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. For some people, it's still magic, but it's doable. If we put this in a graph and would compare them to each other, then you would see that with native applications, You have a lot of capabilities, but you don't have them with web applications, but you have a broad reach with web applications and not with native applications. That also means now that we've got a pretty large gap here. And that gap can be filled by PWAs, basically progressive web applications. So let's dive a little bit more into what a progressive web app is. And based on that, we will also take a look into a strategy on how to test those progressive web applications. But let's just get back. What is a PWA? What is a progressive web application? Well, basically, in heart, it's still a web application. There's nothing different with a normal website. The only difference that under the hood, they're using specific progressive enhancement, new capabilities that you can use in modern browsers. They use specific modern APIs to interact with your phone. And they've got a few things that are really important. If you would dive into progressive web applications, then you would see that there are at least 3 important pillars that they use, which are capable, reliable, and installable. And I will dive into those points in a few seconds. But the advantage of this is that with progressive web applications, you can reach anyone, anywhere, on any device with a single code base. So even, hi there. Yes, you can use it on every phone you want. Doesn't matter this iPhone or a different iPhone, just whatever. But no problem. Yeah, I will show you in a few seconds what a progressive web app is. Okay, yeah, see you, goodbye. If we dive into those key features, then we have capable, reliable, and installable. Let's dive a little bit more into the details of that. If we're talking about capable applications, web applications, that means with PWAs, you've got access to geolocation, to device orientation and motion, camera, microphone, vibration, push notifications, and even Touch ID and Face ID for Safari, and many more. Be aware of the fact, that's why I have that extra asterisk there, is that it's not every API is supported by every browser. And you might now wonder, okay, but why should I then use PWAs? Well, there are more things that are really useful within PWAs. We also know that they mention that they're reliable. And what they mean with reliable is that they're really fast to load. The advantage of PWAs is that you can optimize your components in a different level, making it faster to load, but also the advantages of PWAs is that they have caching mechanisms. That means that if you visit a site once and you visit it again, it will load much faster. It can use its own cache, and that's different cache than we had with the browser cache and history, that kind of stuff. It's better, it works smoother than the current situations. Then we also have the offline mode. The advantage of the PWA with that cache, we can just lose our connection, but we can still use the application. We can maybe even place an order in a retail shop, and when we have a connection, it can just push it to the shop and just have your order finished. And also the advantage, because we already saw with capable, it might not be supported in every browser or in every version of a browser. It still works in every browser. It doesn't mean that if you're not on the latest Chrome or the latest Safari that you will have issues. No, it works on every browser. You will just have fallback situations. And I think one of the most important things of PWAs is that it's installable, which means that you can install this on your home screen and you can install it on your dock. And this is not like we previously did with websites where you would get a bookmark on your home screen. And then if you would click on the bookmark, it would open your browser again. And then, no, this is different. This is a real app. This is a Safari Lite or a Chrome Lite with no address bar and no toolbar. Let me just show you. Our sample app, if you would go to saucedemo.com, it is a PWA, a very simple PWA, but it is a PWA. If you're using an Android phone and if you would go to Chrome, you can get a notification to install it, and I will also show that later on. Or on Safari, you also have the option to add it to your home screen. And as you can see, this is just a website, but the website is now hosted into a very small, basically, application without any address bar, without any toolbar at the bottom. Pure focus on your application. So if we talk about this, if we think about what could we do, how could we test a PWA? What are the differences? Let's take a look at that strategy that we can use. First of all, we need to think about the following. A PWA, it's just a web application. It's just a website. So if you already have a strategy for testing a responsive website, just use that. But be aware of the fact that PWA comes with some extras. So let's take a look at a checklist that, for example, Google provides. Let's just take a look at that checklist. They have a core PWA checklist, and those are points that you can verify. You can do that manually. You can create some automated tests that you verify that it starts fast and it stays fast, that it will work in every browser, that it's responsive to any screen size. Well, hopefully, if you already develop a mobile-first web application, it's already responsive. So this should not be too difficult. Provides a custom offline page when there's really no content. You can just, instead of having T-Rex in Google Chrome, you can create your own custom offline page. And also a core feature that you could verify is that it's installable. But there are many things that you could do. There's also the optimal list according to the web dev page. It provides that offline experience. This is something that you could verify. Can my users still use my application if there's no internet connection? It's fully accessible. They're really, how do you say it? They're really focused with PWAs on providing accessible applications. And with accessible, see it like if you would have a visually handicapped user, then your application really needs to help that user walk through your application, that he can use it, right colors, right attributes, that also a screen reader can read everything on the screen. And this is also an advantage. I didn't mention it when I compared native applications to web applications, but because it's still a web application, you still have your indexes. You have your indexes in Google or whatever search tool you're using. So that's also an advantage. This is also something that you could verify. It works with any input type, meaning that keyboard on your desktop, your fingers when you're using your phone, your mouse, it needs to support everything. It also needs to provide some context for permission request. If you need to access the camera, you need to provide that, also something that you need to verify. And this last point from their checklist, follow best practices for healthy code. Hopefully we do that with everything we build, not only with PWAs, but this was what Google was saying. But there's something extra. You will also want to know, okay, so how should I now test my PWA on mobile devices? Well, I want to go back to the testing pyramid. Everybody knows this one. We've got our unit test. Hopefully everybody is writing a lot of unit tests that at least also make sense, not only verify true is false or true is not false. You've got your services test and you've got your UI test cases. But when we look at mobile applications, web applications, native applications, then a lot of the testing will be done in that UI layer at the top. There's hardly anything that we could do different. But there is, I think. A few years ago, a good friend of mine, Coding, did his first presentation during the first SaaSCon. I think it was in 2017. And that's where he presented the mobile testing pyramid. And I want to use that mobile testing pyramid today also to show you what you could do on every layer. Because if you would look at the PWA, then we've got different layers. We've got the browser layer, things that you could test in a browser. We've got the emulator and simulator layer, and we also have the real devices layer. And I'm going to dive into every layer and also give some pros, cons, and also some examples of what you could test there. So let's first take a look at browsers. First of all, if you would just look at a browser itself, it has very fast execution. Matter of seconds that you can spin up a browser, execute your test case, and it is done. It's easy to scale, easy also in your local machine just to spin up 10 browsers. It should not take too much resources from your machine. And it's cross-platform. And especially if we think back on PWAs on mobile devices, you can at least test it on Chrome and you can test it on Safari. Be aware of the fact that if you test it on Chrome and you emulate it on an iPhone, for example, you're not mimicking Safari. You're still using the engine of Chrome. So I would always advise you to test at least in Chrome, but also in Safari. Then if you would look at the cons, well, it's still a desktop browser. The rendering will be different. a device might render your images, your CSS or whatever differently on a mobile device, on Chrome or on Safari, than it would on a desktop browser. And also the things that you need to be aware of is that you don't have that native integration with your keyboard, with a drop-down, incoming calls if you need to verify if your application would still work. So these are the things that you need to be aware of. And last but not least, yeah, it's not a device. And now you might wonder, okay, what should I test where? Well, if we're talking about the browsers, then I would say system testing. You could see this as unit testing. On the other hand, we're doing it in a UI, so it's not really unit testing. But what I would advise you to do here is to create some isolated test cases in your browser where you could verify if you could call a specific browser API. I don't want you to test the browser API itself, only that your application can call it with the right arguments. Because if the browser API itself is broken, it's broken for everybody. So yeah, I don't know if you want to test that, but that's basically something that you can test with your browsers. Full functional validations, just walk through your application, just see if you can hit every page. And that's something that you could do in your browsers because you will get that fast feedback. Accessibility is something that you can already test. And also you can take a look, for example, into performance testing. And to give you an example about, for example, a tool that you could use within Lighthouse, if you would open Chrome, if you would go to saucedemo.com and you would go to the Lighthouse tab, then you can create a report based on PWAs. You can see you've got a simple PWA app, but it matches, it kind of like it has everything green. It's a very good app based on this list. Well, it's a very simple app, but this is what you can already do. But you can also get some performance metrics already out of Lighthouse. It will also check some accessibility things. So now we're already talking about tools. What can we do more? Well, first of all, we can look at responsive design. Resizing your browser, looking at, for example, also toggling user agents. And what I mean with toggling user agents is that let's take a look at this example. This is an example from booking.com from a year ago or something. When you resize your browser, you would see that your elements will get to different places, especially here with the initial form. And in this case, I'm not on a mobile device, so I will not see download the app button. But if you would go to, this is Safari, to, for example, the user agents and just change it to, for example, iPhone, you would see that I can already get a different layout in comparison to a browser, a desktop browser. And I would also see that notification there that I can download an app instead of using the website. And if I would even change it here for an iPad, then I would see that I have a different layout again. So these are things that you can already verify in the browsers in comparison to other stages. Then, like I already mentioned, we need to be aware that we're testing on Chrome browsers and on Safari browsers just to verify if everything is working and mimicking basically our Android Chrome or iOS Safari browser. And last but not least, what you can already do here is basically a overall visual layout. Like I already mentioned, it's not a real rendering. You could have some issues on real devices, but this is something that you could already start with. So what are the tools that you can use? Well, we've got WebDriver-based tools, we've got JavaScript-based tools, and we've got some other tools. Lighthouse, Axe, and Wave can be used for, or Lighthouse also for performance metrics, Axe and Wave also for accessibility testing. And why did I mention, for example, JavaScript-based tools here? Well, we all see that there's a new demand for tools that live closer to the application. So Cypress, Testcafe, Playwright, and Puppeteer can basically read what is happening in your JavaScript code. Selenium-based, WebDriver-based tools cannot do that. And you might now also wonder, why is WebDriver.io in the JavaScript-based list and not in the WebDriver-based? It's not that I'm a real, because I'm a big fan of WebDriver.io, but WebDriver.io can do both. It can do WebDriver-based test cases, but it can also use Puppeteer under the hood. So it's basically also a JavaScript-based protocol automation framework. So these are the tools that you can use. Now let's take a look at emulators. If we look at emulators, then there are a few pros and a few cons. First of all, if you start developing, you can use a Mac or you can use Windows or Linux. you can just download emulators or you can download simulators. It's easy to set up, easy to run. It's also scalable. You have the same set, the same configuration, and you can run it on 10, 20, 30, or whatever amount of emulators or simulators that you want to use. The advantage you already have here is that you've got that native API integration, and especially with your keyboard or with your dropdown, because that dropdown will look differently on iOS devices and on Android devices than it would on a desktop browser. Be aware of the fact that for emulators, Android only delivers stock, basically the vanilla Android, not with the manufacturer skin from Samsung or for UI or for, no, you have the basic stock versions. There's also no real resource usage because you're using your host machine. So if you want to look into performance, then a browser or emulator or a simulator might not be the best tool to use. And also, yeah, not the real connections to the real APIs, NFC, Bluetooth, that kind of stuff. But what are the test cases that we can execute there? Well, first of all, we can take a look also at some functional flows. You can basically just look at the click path through your application. And my advice here is not to run the same set you have for your browsers, but look at the test cases that add extra value. Or basically, if the test case would be broken, if the flow is not working, will it cost your company money? To give you an example, if you're in a retail, then the most important part of your application would be, can I do a checkout? Because you need to have your customers buy stuff from you. That's something I think you really need to test. A different example, for example, changing your username, does it have the same value to test this on an Android emulator or an iOS simulator in comparison to doing the checkout? So those are kind of like the things that you can think of. What should I test where? Well, hopefully you've got an idea now. The thing that also comes here is that you have that native API integration. You can test the installable, the keyboard integration, the native dropdown. And what I mean with the installable, this is again for iOS. If you would go to Safari and you would open SaaS demo URL, then if you would click on the share icon at the bottom, then you will get a notification if you're on iOS 14, for example. At the bottom, we need to scroll a little bit, but at the bottom you can see add to home screen. Let's make it a little bit bigger. It's there, and if you would click on that one, you will get a screen like this where you could give a name and you would already see the URL is fixed. Click on add, you will have an icon on your screen. And this is really useful because this is the same what you had with your mobile applications, your native applications. I really love native applications because it's just a focused application. It's not that I need to go to 20 different URLs or something. That's also the advantage of the installable. Clicking on it, it will open it, and I do not have all the things like the address bar or the toolbar that might disturb my focus on my application. So this is what we can do. Oh, SaaSbar, got a question? Yes. Cool. What's your question? Should I test everything in the browser or the install? I think this is a good question. Thanks, SaaSbar. Questions we get a lot from our customers is that if I have an installable, should I test my application in the installable or should I test my application in the browser itself? Well, if you look at this technically, then it's still a website. The installable itself, it's just a Chrome or a Safari Lite version, but it's still hosting the content that you would also host in the normal Safari and the normal Chrome. And by default, you can already test this. So testing everything in an installable, I wouldn't say that. Maybe some functional things. Sorry, Marcus, can you close your mic? Thank you. Sorry. You can already test a lot of things in your browser. The only thing that I would advise you to do is to also look at some visuals. And the reason for that is that the visualization of your application might be different because you don't have that address bar and you don't have that toolbar in your application. So these are kind of like the things that you could test in that installable. And I hope I answered your question, SaaSbot. Awesome, cool. The thing that we also have are visuals. You can already test some visuals, and iOS with their simulators are more accurate in comparison to Android emulators. So like I already mentioned, they could be influenced, the look and feel could be influenced on the Android emulators by the sauce that Samsung or UI or LG is adding. So be aware of this. And then last but not least, and this is something that a lot of people still forget, touch interaction, basically gestures. What I still see with a lot of customers and users of Appium is that they're not doing real swipes in the browser, or they're not doing real swipes in native applications. They just find ways not to do it because gestures might be complex. Well, I've done a webinar on that. Please watch it. It's on YouTube. Hopefully you will see that it's not that difficult. If you just know what to do, and hopefully I explain it there, it might be really useful for you, because this is how your customer is using your application. He is using his fingers, and he's not using a JavaScript injection. I've never seen a customer using JavaScript to say scroll, scroll. It would be magical if they can do that with their phone. But then you could wonder, okay, what are the tools that we could use to test, for example, emulators? And let's get back to the list that we had. We've got the WebDriver and Appium-based applications or tools, and we have the JavaScript-based tools. And now you already see that Cypress, Playwright, and Puppeteer, well, you cannot use them with emulators and simulators. The only tool you currently can use is Testcafe. And be aware of the fact, there's also an asterisk there, you can only use it when you need to automate the browser context. With WebDriver, you can basically rely on the Appium part of it, basically the JSON wire protocol, W3C protocol, and the mobile protocol that they implemented. And you can do that with JavaScript, Java, Python, Ruby, C#, even I think with PHP if you want to do that. This might also be a good point for you to think about. If I've chosen Cypress or Playwright or Puppeteer to test my browsers, and now you need to use a complete new framework to test your emulators and simulators. So you might think about, can I do this wiser? Can I reuse my resources? Yes, by making a good choice when you choose your tool. And when you choose your tool, think about the future, what you always need to test. Then you might have seen that you cannot use Cypress and Playwright and Puppeteer, especially for the mobile devices. But knowing this, let's also take a look at the real devices. If you would look at the pros also for the real devices, you have the ability to test all the native APIs, offline mode, caching, battery, manufacturer secret sauce. And you might be wondering now, offline mode. When I'm automating something from Android, I can use toggle Wi-Fi. That's an option in Appium. True, you can do that on emulators and on real devices, but there is no offline mode experience on simulators. So that's why I've put it here, because basically, if you want to test something, you would like to test this also on two platforms. For iOS, if you have a simulator, you need to disconnect your host machine from the internet to basically make sure that you're offline. Hardly anything you can, it's pretty hard to automate that part. Let's say it like that. With real devices, you can, and I will show that later on also with an example. Then if we would look at what can we do, again, visual usability. This is really important. Look at the gestures. How is your user, how is your customer using your application, and implement that. Look at performance, look at those native API integrations, and especially here, the visuals. This is the part where you would have, at least for Android, all the right places to test this. And last but not least, you've got your real OS. If we look also at the tools, then we would even see that Testcafe cannot be used here. So if we're talking about testing it PWA, basically your web application, testing it as an installable, you need to use something which is WebDriver/Appium based. Otherwise, you will not be able to interact with more than only your browser context. So now that we know this, let's also take a look at some examples, some automation examples. And like I mentioned, I also wanted to share with you how it works on an Android device, how the installable on an Android device works. This is just an example. This is an emulator here. If I would visit saucedemo.com, then I would automatically get a notification here. This is not a W3C standard. This is not somewhere that every browser is supporting. This is only something that that Chrome is supporting on the mobile devices, but it's basically a pop-up telling you you can add this to your home screen. And if you would click on this, you would get a few steps to add it to your home screen. If you do not see this on your Android device on Chrome, click on the three dots next to your tab. On that part, you will get a new menu, and you would also have the notification there at your home screen. And if you add it to your home screen, you will see something like this. It opens, or it basically puts the Chrome browser in the background, and it installs the application on your home screen. If you need to automate this, if you need to automate the installable, then you need to be aware of the fact that you need to walk through all these steps that I've just shown you for Android, and also need to be aware of the fact that not every vendor, every manufacturer opens or installs the application on the home screen. Some also install it in the application screen. So it's not a given fact for every device, every vendor, every screen size or whatever, that it will open there. So if you're going to automate this, then be aware of the fact that you need to add some extra steps to verify, where am I? Do I need to go left or right? But I've got a few examples of that for you also in code, so I will share that also afterwards with you. Then we have the installable if we open it. And again, here we don't have that address bar, we don't have the toolbar, only the software toolbar from Android itself. If you would look at iOS, then in iOS, they made some changes also to the layout. Every major version changes something in how it looks and feels. And there was a major difference, at least for PWAs for iOS 12 and iOS 14. Again, if you go to this website, and if I would open it, I can still share it. Click on the share button and add it to my home screen. Only the way how to get to add it to your home screen is different. In iOS 12, you've got kind of like a swipe container there. You need to swipe it to the left to get the home screen, add to home screen. And on Android 14, you need to swipe it to the top and then click on this button. So this is something you need to be aware of. If you want to automate this, be aware of the different versions of iOS. And then we'll get the same screen. That didn't change, same locators also, and in the end it will be there on your home screen. And when you add it to your home screen, you can open it again without the address bar and also without the toolbar at the bottom. This process, like I mentioned, can be automated, not with the JavaScript-based tools. You really need to use Appium for this. And this process might seem easy because it's just copying the steps that a end user would do, but you need to really think about the different devices and the different OS versions. If you're able to do this, then you can just run it on SaaS Labs, you can run it on emulators and simulators. And just to give you an example, I ran it on 3 different devices, also in the SaaS Labs cloud, in the real device cloud. And what you can see here is on the left, we have an Android device. In the middle, we've got iOS 12, we've got iOS 14 on the right. And this is basically automated every step for different OS versions and being able to open the application. There's one thing that I wanted to mention here. If you're done automating your application, and especially when you're using also the SaaS Labs cloud, on Android devices, it will be removed. But if you're automating a sensitive application, for example, if you were the tester of the Microsoft application before the beta even went live, you need to make sure that your application will be deleted from the home screen. And bookmarks are just a little bit harder to remove than normal applications. You cannot call them with an intent or with a bundle ID. You really need to look into your screen and then click on that thing. Same also for deleting deleter apps. If you're using private devices in SaaS Labs Cloud, then there's nothing you should be worried about because the devices are allocated for you as a customer. If you're using public devices, be aware of the fact that the cleaning process might not remove your PWA. That's why I implemented a delete option also for iOS. If you want to know how this goes, this is the link of the repository. I've been busy with this for a few weeks just to figure out what the right flow is. I kind of like written down all the things that I saw during my investigation, what is working, what is not working. We will share the slides afterwards if you want to look at it. Hopefully it can be useful for you if you want to automate your PWA as an installable. Then last but not least, the second example that I wanted to show. One of the features of a PWA is that you can use it in offline mode. it uses cache. How should you verify that? Well, initially, what you can already do if you're in that browser test cases, then, and even in your unit test cases, there are certain things in your application which are called service workers that control the cache. So you can already test those in a very early stage. But if you want to know what happens with your application when you are basically using it on a real device, then you should be able to disable the Wi-Fi. But like I already mentioned, this only works on on Android. This does not work on iOS. There is no API for Appium to disable the Wi-Fi. This is not something that Apple is exposing to the XUI test driver to disable the Wi-Fi. So how should you do that? How should you automate this, disabling the Wi-Fi on real devices? Because, yeah, like I already mentioned, on simulators, disabling Wi-Fi is not something that you could do. You need to disable the host Wi-Fi, and it's pretty hard to automate that. What I would normally do here is think, what are the solutions? First of all, we already have the fact that we can use Android, just the method from Android itself. So what I would normally do here is to think about what are the steps that customers need to take or end users need to take to disable the Wi-Fi. Create a method, make it smart, that if it's Android, just do the magical thing from Android. And if we're iOS, then do all the extra steps we need to do for iOS. So I've written down all the steps. We first need to put Safari in the background. Then we need to go to the settings. And you might now wonder, why the settings? Why are you not going to the menu if you would drag it from the top of your screen or the bottom of your screen? Well, good question, but it has to do with the fact that when I create a script, I try to make it as stable as possible. And when I need to determine which device I have for iOS, if I have, for example, a device with a notch, then I need to drag it from the top. But if I have a touch button, then I need to drag it from the bottom. I don't want to add that extra complex stuff in my script. I want to make it as stable as possible. And the settings are pretty stable as long as I'm using an iPhone since, what is it, iOS 4 or 5 or something. The settings are still in the same place. Same also for the Wi-Fi. Then when you're in the settings, just do some magical things with the Wi-Fi and then kill the settings. And again, you might wonder, why do I need to kill the settings? Why can I not just put it to the background? Well, what I normally say is that if you create a method, you should be able to rely on your beginning state, the state you're in when you start your script. And the initial state will be settings have not been opened. If you would reuse this method, you should also rely on the fact that settings was not opened. If you put it to the background, it will stay in the situation where you, for example, changed the Wi-Fi. And that's not something I think that you should do with your script, because then you need to make it very complex to say, okay, it's the first time. And if it's the first time, then I need to do this. Now, well, it's not something that I would advise you. Just kill the settings. The downside is it might take a little bit longer. The upside is that your test will be more stable if you do that. And then last but not least, launch the browser. So if you look at some Appium methods that at least are available then for iOS, put it in the background, use the background method, execute the settings. You can just call bundle IDs in iOS applications just to start specific applications. Appium can help you with that. And then last but not least, also terminating it, basically killing the settings, can also be done with this. And then last but not least, launch your browser again, launching Safari in this case, by being done by launch app, providing the bundle ID, and also, when this is executed, it should work. So let's take a look at testing the offline mode. And what we see here on the left, Android, on the right, you would see iOS. Take a look also at the top there, you would see the Wi-Fi signals. And for the first time, I always need to go through the application to make sure that the cache is being activated, that everything is being stored. And now on the left, yes, you would see on Android, the Wi-Fi is gone now. I'm going to refresh the page. And on the right side, you would see now for iOS that the Wi-Fi is being disabled. I'm refreshing the page again, and I'm walking through the application. So this is a way also to test on real devices that your PWA has a caching mechanism, because if you would normally turn off the Wi-Fi signal, if you would refresh your page, you would see on Android that T-Rex, a nice game you can play, but not the application that you wanted to test. If you want to know which steps you need to take to make this work on Android, to make this work also on iOS, please go to this link. Again, we will share also the slides afterwards, and you will see the link there, so you don't need to copy, type, or whatever. You can just reuse that. So hopefully I've shown you the things that you could do with PWAs in comparison to native applications. And you might also wonder, is a PWA now a good alternative for a native application? Well, it depends. It depends on your use case. If you're a large organization, it still might be something that you could use. If you're a small organization, it might be cheaper to develop a PWA in comparison to, for example, a native application. And if you would want to see some real PWAs live there in the world, go to Starbucks, go to Twitter, go to Facebook. All those companies already develop PWAs that you don't need to download the application, but you can just install it from your browser. Be aware that on every OS version, you can use different browsers. But if you want to test this on Android, use Chrome, and on iOS, use Safari. For now, I want to thank you for your time, for listening to this mobile dude, and hopefully it was useful for you. If there are any other questions, feel free to contact us, and happy to answer that.